March 2025 CSRA AACE section meeting, and we are so glad that you're able to join us. We have a wonderful speaker for you this evening. I'd like to introduce her, Lisa Coleman. She's the lead analyst and enterprise risk program manager, responsible for risks across multiple programs to include strategic, enterprise, and summary risks, as well as the risk register for the Department of Energy. Lisa reports all program baseline summary risks for the environmental management portfolio. She holds a bachelor's in mathematics and computer science and has a master's in computer information systems. Join with me in welcoming Lisa. Lisa, thank you so much. Take it away.
Yay. Well, again, my name is Lisa Coleman, and I'm very happy to be here. And I've decided everybody is my friend, including the people online and in the audience. So that makes it easier for me to sit here and talk to you today. With that said, the title of my presentation is Risks, Impacts, and Responses. Oh my. Why that title? I came up with that title because sometimes managing risk can be a little overwhelming and it can be a beast, right? Like lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my. So, play on words, I decided that's the direction I wanted to go in because a lot of times when we talk about risk, there's so many different terms. So, a little bit about my journey. When I started going to different conferences and workshops to learn more about risk, one of the things I realized is every organization is different, and most of them were not doing enterprise risk. That was strange to me. I assumed everybody was doing enterprise risk, but I quickly found out no, they were not. And then they were doing things specific for their industry. And so when I used the term, it was completely different from how they were using a term. They had different acronyms and terms. And so anytime I found a person actually doing enterprise risk, I would get excited, go to their workshop and be supportive of them. And it always amazed me that it was only maybe two of us in the room and everybody else was either doing insurance risk, investment risk, cyber, that's the hot one. And now the hot one is AI. And I recently went to an online workshop and they were talking about, things to consider, risks to consider. And again, none of it sounded like enterprise to me. And so I thought, maybe I need to do an overview of enterprise risk again and go a little bit deeper. Still an overview, but just a little bit more detail on enterprise risk. So that's how we got here with this title. Next slide. So what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to cover some risk management basics, the risk life cycle, the process, the anatomy of a risk, and then some final tips and takeaways. Next slide. So with that said, what I love about this picture is the umbrella. And it kind of sums up what enterprise risk is. Like it's like a big umbrella over the corporation. And as we talk a little bit in more detail, I'll say this. Every company should have a mission statement. And if you have a mission statement, you should have goals, objectives, and priorities, right? And that helps you to meet your company's mission and plan for success. And most people do that. They plan for success. But sometimes you'll see that people don't plan for what if things go wrong, right? Risk management, specifically enterprise risk management, increases the odds that a company can realize their mission and their goals. Without it, a company can't be successful because inevitably there will be problems that crop up without risk management. The company won't be in a position to address them, and this will put a dent in the ability to meet the mission. So this is why you need enterprise risk management. That's the reason. Next slide. So when I say ERM, I'm talking enterprise risk management, and it's a dynamic process. People think risk management is, oh, I'm going to go out and I'm going to capture the risk. That's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to capture them, put them in a cute log, and then every so often, I guess I'll look at the log and maybe I, manage some of the risk, maybe I didn't. People think that's risk management. That is not risk management. That is not risk management. It's a whole process. One of the things you are going to need to do if you do real risk management is you have to have a team. And it should be a pretty diverse team from people from different departments, different functions in your company. And those individuals will be the team that are going to document the risks. And not only that, but document how you're going to handle those risks, how you're going to put them in your schedule, how you're going to fund them, and reconvene to see if there's been any changes to those risks. Those type of thoughts and questions indicate whether the risk is properly being monitored and managed. And if these types of activities are occurring, then you can say that you're doing some management of your risk. So the purpose. The purpose of risk management is to create and protect the value of your business. And so business is about managing risk taking. Risk management is part of your decision making. If you're a good company, that it should be. Sometimes risk management fails because risk may hit despite being well managed. Risk management program cannot always address all of your risks. So you may have a plan, but it may not address everything that's happening, right? So risk management is a strategy. It's not a guarantee, but it is a strategy to increase your odds of success. So when we say it's a dynamic process, what we're really saying that you can go back. Okay, what we're really saying is that it allows you to identify and manage your risk. It establishes risk and opportunities across a company. So it's not just managing the things that go wrong, but also opportunities that you can take advantage of. The process also identifies potential events that may impact your objectives and your priorities. I talked about earlier that you should have a mission statement and that you have objectives and priorities that fall out of that. And so risk management will help you with those objectives and priorities. It'll also help you evaluate and grade the risk to determine the severity, because some risks are just low risk. They're not really that important. And then other risks are real important and you really want to manage them because they have such a severe impact. Risk take action. The risk process takes action to mitigate those risks. Like, what's the point of identifying them if you're not going to do anything about them? So you have to have some type of strategy. It allows you to monitor the performance of what you're doing to address that risk. And it allows you to communicate across departments. If you're having a good assessment or a good review, you have people from different departments and you're able to communicate in that space. Risk management process also allows you to capture any lessons learned. And you want to do that because down the line, there may be a project or another program that mimics this one. And you can take lessons learned from that and use those risks copy those risks in your new risk register, right? It documents information and continuously improves the program. Next slide. So again, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. You have to be clear about your process. The items listed are just a minimal example of what needs to be in your plan. So let's talk terminology real quick. Are there any questions so far? No? Okay. Let's talk about terminology. So when I say, well, let me back up for a second. Again, a lot of times when you talk to different individuals, their definition of risk is different from your definition of risk. And just the terms and terminology can be very baffling at times. So you want to be crystal clear about what it is you're talking about. So I decided, okay, let's just look at the terminology. risk. What is a risk? It's an uncertain event that, should it occur, would have an effect. And that effect can be positive or negative on that project or business objective. Possible future event that may have an impact, also known as a threat or an opportunity. So in some companies, they don't call it risk, they call it threats. Now, the environment that I'm in, we choose to call it risk, and that's because we have a different definition for threat. And we don't want people to get those mixed up. So depending on your company and culture depends on the term that you'll use. Also understand that a lot of times when you say the word risk, it's like an umbrella term for both positive and negative. So when I want to be clear, I use the term event. I say you have an event and that event has an impact, right? So when you look up here, you see for the word event, I say that's a generic term for both risk and opportunity. And then that creates more clarity. For opportunity, again, that's an event that could be made to happen with potential for improvement of something. And the flip of that is a consequence is a negative impact, whereas a benefit has a positive impact. Then we have probability, which is likelihood. And normally when we say likelihood, we're saying likely, very likely, almost certain, unlikely, very unlikely, and negligible. So those are the types of terms we use with the probability of a risk. And a fallback is a workaround. So what if you actually realize that risk? That risk actually happens. If that risk actually happens, if it's a high risk, I think you want to have a fallback. If it's a low risk, well, you may not care. But if it's a high risk, you definitely want a fallback to be in place, like an emergency response plans for that particular risk. Now, issue. An issue is a present problem or a concern. In other words, 100% is going to happen, or it has happened, or is happening now, but it's 100%. And that's the difference. A risk is 0 to 99.999, right? An impact is nope, 100, absolutely 100. And you have to decide, what do I want to have? If you are going to automate your process, do I want to have both my issues and my risks in the same database, or do I want to keep them separate? That's a determination that you have to make as a company. Risk register, the company's list of identified risks. Typically, when you have that risk register of identified risks, you also have it graded according to high and low, right? And typically it may be color coded as well. So these are just some basic terms. And two other terms that I don't have listed that you may hear is velocity and frequency. Frequency is how often is this risk going to happen? Is this a one-off event, or is this something that can happen a couple of times? And then also velocity. So that was frequency that I just described, but we also have velocity. And so velocity is if I know it's going to eventually happen and be an issue, well, how quick will we get there? How quick will this risk happen? Is it going to take a year, or is it going to happen tomorrow? Like, what are we looking at here? So that's another thing that you can determine. Now, everybody doesn't deal with those two, but that's something that, if you hear it, something for you to consider. The main thing, again, is that you want everybody speaking the same language, and you want input from different people. All right. Next slide. So in enterprise risk management, you're going to have roles and responsibilities. Everybody should not be doing the same thing, right? You have your risk analyst, and that I do that kind of work. And that's the person that's going to enter the risk data and update the risk register, identify the risk, or help the customer identify their risk. Because sometimes they don't know how to identify their risk, right? And so you're the one that has to guide them through that process. And help them perform periodic risk reviews. Then you have the enterprise risk manager or the program manager, and they ensure that there is a risk management plan in place for the company. They approve the policies and procedures, and they review potential enterprise risks. So, in other words, if you have risks at a low level or an operational level in a particular department, the group or that group's line of management is responsible for saying, maybe that operational risk is significant enough to rise up or be elevated, and you may have heard that term too, be elevated to the enterprise level to be managed. So it's not just something that we're going to keep down here, but we're going to manage it up here. All right. And the enterprise risk manager or program manager does just that. Now, the business managers or the executive team, they look at those very high risks. So if you have your risks, you score them, and you have a lot of them that are high risk, those are the ones that upper level management, they want to see those because it helps them make decisions about how they want to spend the money and how they want to improve the schedule to address those risks because they may impact the mission. And again, remember what I said, the company's looking at the entire mission, and upper level management wants to make sure that you're meeting the mission. They use the information in this process to make company decisions at the end of the day. Next. So again, if you don't plan, you're really planning to fail. So you really need to manage those things that could sabotage your success. Manage those things that can sabotage your success. And the best way to do that is to have an enterprise risk management plan or some type of risk management plan that addresses how you're going to do that. So the whole purpose of the plan is to say, what's the process? What's the how? So the meat on, if we saw this as like a meal, right? The meat on the plate would be the process. So at a bare minimum in your plan, you want to have your terms, abbreviations, and acronyms. And, depending on your company, depends on how much of that you put in there in the company culture, but you at a bare minimum, put your acronyms and your abbreviations in there. Next, your roles and responsibilities, who's doing what. That should be in your plan. And then the actual process of how you're going to go about identifying and evaluating and monitoring these risks. And of course, you want to put in your reference documents. What's your company's policies and procedures? Is there one? Should there be one? If there's not one, you may want to make sure there is one and create one so that it helps to monitor how you go about doing your business. So I keep saying the word process. Next slide. You got to have one. And I think a lot of times we think we have one because we're operating out of our gut. But I would say, no, put it down, write it down. And if you don't have it written down, this is the time to start. Next slide. And so I love this graphic because it shows you the overall process of what you can do. Now, mind you, this is not a end all be all. This is not like the only way you can do it. This is just an example. Your company may do it differently, but at least now you see an example. The main thing is if you look at the very top, you'll see that you're going to plan, you're going to identify, evaluate, take action, and monitor. So under the first column, where we say we're going to plan, you need to know, again, what are your company's policies and procedures? What requirements are governing not only you as a risk manager, but also that department? What requirements are in place that everyone has to abide by? Again, we already talked about responsibilities, but also the scope. What is the scope? If you don't have the scope, do not walk into a meeting because it's a recipe for disaster. Because if you don't know the scope, they can decide they don't want to give you the scope. So you may want to do a little bit of research. What I found to help with that is to look at archive documents, interview people, and just flat out ask the person before you go in there, hey, what scope are we dealing with? What budget do you have? What is your schedule? Those are things that you need to know before you have a risk review or a risk assessment. So the second column is identify. And you cannot identify unless you understand what the accessible elements are that are associated with that scope. So there are different ways of doing that, right? Of identifying risk. Most people, when they think of identifying risk, they think of brainstorming. And that's only going to get you so far, especially when you're talking about a system, a complicated system, or a complicated facility, or something technical or scientific. You really need those accessible elements. You need for that project manager or that scope owner to lay out what it is that's included in their scope. If you don't look at it from that direction, you can look at it from another direction, which is your work breakdown structure elements. What that will do is show you this is what this department is responsible for, and this is how much money they get to get that job done, right? If you look at that, they absolutely have to do that, and there may be risk associated with them being able to get that work done, all right? So that's a really great way of identifying some areas to identify risk. Another one, you can do a survey by email. Sometimes that group may not be able to provide you their work breakdown structure, or they just may not know, or a variety of different reasons why. But what you can do just by sending out that email, that will allow you to categorize risk into buckets. So when you get in that room with them and you have the team sitting around the table, you can say, okay, what risks fall in this bucket? And can we all agree on that? Especially if you've already sent out the survey, right? Now you got a baseline of what you can work with. And then you can build up from there. If you have, let's say, 3 buckets and they've put maybe 5 in one bucket, 10 in another, and 4 in another. Now you have a starting point of conversation, and it may trigger them to bring up even more risks that are not even listed. But now they know, oh, I can put it in that bucket right there, or that bucket right there. My coworker calls that the sticky method. And it works because, and it speeds up your ability to identify risks. So we went from having these long 3-hour plus meetings to just an hour and a half because we were using the sticky method, because we could identify columns and say, okay, you tell us what goes in what bucket. The second column is evaluate. Now, that's when you actually are sitting in that room and you're having an assessment. So I've been using 2 terms and interchanging them, and I'm gonna stop doing that and say, an assessment is when you first sit down to identify the risk. A risk review is when you circle back to provide updates to that risk. You're reviewing it. So that's the difference. So in that evaluate phase, you're really doing an assessment. You're looking at the background, and you're really you're structuring your risk. Like, what is the exact event? And that becomes real important because at first they'll tell you one thing and say, oh, the event is this and the impact is that. But then when you get down to estimating the likelihood and the consequence, they think about it some more and go, no, that's not the real risk. Let's go back. And that's why the process is important, to sit in that room and really kind of talk out, what are we talking about, and get background information. Because if you don't have enough background information, you just go along with what they say with the event. Well, the event is X. Okay, you just type it in there and go along with it. So to keep that conversation going, you really want to get that background information. If you can't get it in that enough background information in the room, again, look at their archive documents and see what they have out there, their lessons learned, because that will provide more information. Determine the level. Ask them what their gut feeling is. Is this a high risk or a moderate risk? No, it's moderate. And then somebody else will go, I don't think it's moderate, I think it's low. So now you have to, you're the coordinator in the room that helps pull out the best answer, right? So nobody's arguing and fussing with each other. You're kind of like the referee in the room and to help them identify exactly how that risk should look, whether it's high, medium, or low. The next column, take action. Once you can agree on all of that, okay, now assignments have to be made. Who's going to own this risk? And it may look like it's two people that own it, but I say follow the money. Who paying for it? Because the person paying for it, that's their risk. So their voice should be the voice you're listening to on that particular thing, right? Um, Also assign individuals to actions that need to take place. Just because somebody owns it doesn't mean they're going to do the actions. The manager may own it, but his people may take action, and you want to kind of capture that kind of information. You want to prioritize your handling actions and execute those actions accordingly. With the main thing is putting those actions on your schedule. If those actions are not on your schedule, it's a good likelihood they might not get done, and you may come back a year later or maybe sooner and nothing's been done, right? Because it hasn't been scheduled. Our last column is monitor. So there you want to integrate, track the report, and evaluate again. So what you're really doing, you're reviewing those risks, and each department or group may do it different. If it's a project, especially if it's a really high impact project, they may monitor their stuff weekly. We have people that in our organization that monitor every week, same time, same bat station. They're going to monitor those risks because it gets reported up to their upper level management. And they don't want that, so they don't manage those risks. Then we have other people, those projects are just as important. However, they have decided that they only monitor monthly, but they have a very good system and they're able to update their accomplishments on a monthly basis. Then you have those programs that are so big, so massive. Nope, once a year, just once a year. And those typically are programs. And it takes so much input to get those done. It requires a whole year before you can update them again. So everybody is not going to be on the same schedule, but as long as everybody is monitoring their risk, that's what's important. Next slide. So how does a life cycle look on a risk? Well, I'll just give you a typical example because everything's not going to look the same depending on what company you work for. It's going to look slightly different. But the main thing is you want to review, you want to update and approve those risks and close them out when you're done, when the life cycle is over with. Um, your reviews and assessments should be done by a team of stakeholders where those people actually have an interest and it affects them how these risks are monitored. If you're doing that, it will help you with putting a status on your risk. So when you first create those risks, they're going to be unapproved because it's just you kind of brainstorming, you're looking at your accessible elements, you're trying to determine should this be a risk, should it not be a risk? So you start off in the unapproved state, but as you progress and everybody in that room agrees, now you're going to make that risk active, right? And then finally, once you've met the end of that life cycle with your program, you close your risk out. Now, there's a lot of stuff that can happen in between. And some organizations have more than one status. I've been told there's an organization that has 10 different status. I can't imagine that at all. My brain just, I can't. But we have more than these three, but those are the three basic ones that you really need to have if you're going to manage your risk, okay? That last bullet, with business managers, your executive team. Now, this is the group that reviews, again, the high risk and enterprise risk, and they use the information from the enterprise risk management process to make company decisions. And so having a process is important, and you shouldn't skip that. Companies are great at identifying risks, but not as great managing them. Even if you decide, Lisa, I don't like this process, that's fine, but you still need to have one. Figure out how it's going to look and then have one. So in this case, when we say plan, what we really mean is obtain the scope, identify the team, the budget, and the schedule. That may take a little bit of research, but do that before you sit in the room with your assessment team. If you're on a project, you can get a lot of that information from the project manager. If it's a program, you may have to dig a little harder, but you can find this information and you need it before you go in the risk review. Before you go into the risk assessment, because you want to be able to identify the proper scope, right? And you can break it down and find risk associated with it. So the assessment section, you want to obtain detail that identifies the event, the impact, the owner, and the likelihood. Um, you want to be able to grade it, identify what the cost, the schedule, and other categories that you deem important. Now, in your organization, that's going to look different. It may just be, well, let's look at mission as well. That's a category we think we need to grade. But in other companies, they look at safety and security. And that's when these other terms that you may hear when you hear about risk management, like is this a security risk in terms of cybersecurity? Or is this a security risk just in general? Or is this, I don't know, an AI risk? Is this a safety risk? But these are other things to consider grading if it's that important to you, right? Next, you want to, develop a plan to address the risk. And so the plan that you would have to address the risk when you're assessing is if it's a risk or it's negative, you want to either avoid it, mitigate it, transfer it, or accept it. Sometimes you just cannot avoid a risk. You can't avoid it, but you at least want to reduce it. And so if you're trying to reduce it, we call that mitigating. A lot of people, when they think of risk, they think of insurance risk because you're transferring that risk to somebody else. You pay a little money every month so you can transfer it to them, right? And accepting the risk means I know it's there. I know it can happen. Nothing I can do about it. So we're just going to accept it, right? If it's an opportunity, you want to exploit it. In other words, you want to see if you can get it to happen, period, point blank. You want it to happen. If you can't force it to happen, you want to at least kind of enhance the likelihood, right? So that's another opportunity that you can do. I mean, another option you have is to enhance. In some cases, you may want to share the opportunity. And then finally, you may ignore it. Now, what I notice is in the industry, they like to use the word accept again, but I think that doesn't accurately identify what you're doing. You're just ignoring that opportunity, is what you're really doing. But they, for whatever reason, have decided that accept is the term that they want to do. But understand that when they say accept for an opportunity, they mean we're just going to ignore it. Um, and and I'll give an example why. It may be too expensive. It's an opportunity, but it's too expensive to implement. So we're going to ignore it. Next is monitor and collect feedback. There is where you want to review and update the status of the risk. And that's where you have the risk review, where you get all those people to come back in the room and provide input like what's been happening with this risk. Give me an update. Where are we now? Have we implemented any of the actions that we said we were going to implement? and collect the feedback from them and then document that. And then finally communicate through dashboards and reports. Now that I've talked about the process, let's just talk about the types of enterprise risks. You have strategic risks, and these are the risks that impact the company's objectives and priorities. A lot of times you'll hear the word enterprise and strategic interchange with each other, but it's a slight difference. Enterprise is everything you see. Strategic specifically is focused on those risks that cause you not to be able to implement your objectives for that year. Okay. Summary risks. These are risks that you've looked across the enterprise and you keep seeing the same thing. Not enough qualified people, not enough qualified people, not enough qualified people. We keep running across the same risk no matter what department we look at. Therefore, we may want to capture that at the enterprise level. So again, enterprise risks are those risks that you capture at the top level that upper level management is looking at. Will you have operational risks? Yes, but they're being managed at a department level or a group level. Enterprise risks are managed at the top, and management is looking at them. So in my department, if we see the same risk popping up in different groups, in different departments, we try to capture that at a top level and say, okay, we need to put this at the top. Management needs to see this. And we call those the summary risks. Then you have root cause risks. Those are risks that happen and they don't look anything alike. But if you study them long enough, they start looking alike. So when you first see a root cause risk, it looks like, well, people try to come up with a solution based on the symptoms. That's the best way I can describe it. You're trying to come up with a solution based on whatever symptom you're looking at, which is why they look different on the surface. Once a root cause analysis is done on them and you dig a little deeper, it's the same problem. It's the same problem across the board. And a lot of times it's culture with root cause risk. It's something going, it could be the culture with management. If you dig a little deeper, that person did that because they were scared of management. And then over here, this person did something completely different. But if you dig a little deeper, yeah, that person did that because they were scared of management. So, okay, if that keeps coming up, that's a root cause risk that we need to manage at the top level. A lot of times people don't like to capture those, but it is what it is. Force majeure and acts of God. Those are those risks that you couldn't have predicted that in a million years. You just couldn't predict it. And the best example of that is COVID. I don't think any of us thought we'd be sitting at home trapped in our houses. That's just something we just didn't think of. Some people did, most people didn't. So that's a kind of risk that you didn't have a lot of control over and you didn't think of. You wouldn't think of it. And then you have those catastrophic risks. Those risks that if that it's a low likelihood that it'll happen, but if it happens, now you got a major problem. Sometimes you hear those called black swan risks because the likelihood is just so low, but it's just so painful if they actually happen. Site-wide business risks. Those are those risks that they're not necessarily catastrophic, but they can impact the business. And they don't necessarily impact the mission statement, but they still impact the business, like pension. That's going to impact everybody at the company if you have a pension risk. You see what I'm saying? So that's an example of that one. Next slide. So I told you enterprise risk, how it looks. So let's talk about the anatomy of a risk. Many are familiar with a risk register, but there should be a detailed data sheet for each risk. A lot of times people just want to open up a spreadsheet and put the information in the spreadsheet and go, ta-da, that's my risk register. I would advise you to go a little deeper and get some software that allows you to capture much more information on that risk, because then you can manage that risk a lot better. Next slide. So when I say a data sheet or a form, what I'm saying is a risk that has different sections on that form to capture the different information. So we're going to start with the general information that's relevant to the entire risk. Next slide. At a bare minimum, you should have the title, the risk, and the risk impact. But there are other fields you should have as well, like who's the owner of this risk? Who's the risk analyst helping you with this risk? Is there a sponsor? Sometimes, you'll have VPs that will help sponsor the elimination of a risk. What general category does this risk fall in? Is this a business risk? Is this a technical risk? Important, what's the status? Is this risk active or closed? Where are we with this? In our database, we have a status called expired, because it's been sitting out there too long. It's like bad food in the refrigerator. It went bad. We got to get rid of it. You clearly didn't manage it or care about it. So I question, is it a real risk? Right. Date of creation, because that helps you identify if this is still a relevant risk. Statement of event. That's important because it allows you to capture the background, exactly what the risk is, and what impact it's going to have. You may also want to consider a trigger and any meeting notes. Next slide. Grading the data. Now, this is information that will help you actually grade the data and decide what kind of score you want to give your risk. And we typically have inherent, current, target, and likelihood categories. Grading that we need to put down. So when we say inherent, what we're saying is, okay, this is when we have our assessment. How we grade it in that assessment, that's our first grading, and we're going to say this is our baseline, this is where we're starting, and that's inherent. As you have additional reviews, you're going to change it. It should change. Your current is not going to be current anymore. So you should be improving. As you improve, you put that improved grading underneath current. And you're moving towards a target. Your target may be to completely eliminate it, or your target may be to reduce it, but you're working towards a target score. And then you have your likelihood. In addition to having a likelihood, you need to have a justification for each of the things I just said. What is your justification for how you graded it the first time, how you improved it? What is your justification for the likelihood? That needs to be captured. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. So that little small graphic on the right-hand side, that's called your probability impact diagram. And what you do with that is that's how you're grading it, right? And what it really is the probability times the consequence. And that's how you get your scoring. When you have software, it will really help you with that. But if you don't have the software, just know that you're multiplying the probability by the consequence. And you'll have, that's a 5x5 structure. So you will have numbers assigned to your probability and numbers assigned to your consequence. And that's how you'll do the multiplication to come up with your score. And that's just a quick overview because we really don't have the time to get deep into that, but just so that you understand, that's where your grading really comes in. Your grading results are either going to be high, moderate, or low. And that pretty much means that which risks are going to require the most attention, which are going to be the worst, which opportunities have the most benefit, and where is my highest success going to be based on how I rate these. When you're doing this part of your analysis, what you're really doing is one second. It'll come to that. What I wanted to say will come to me in a minute. So I'm going to skip that for a second and circle back. Next slide. The actual plan. So after you identify these risks, you need to have a handling plan. And in that handling plan, again, you're going to have these fields, your title, your description, and then exactly how you want to handle that plan by mitigating or accepting, transferring the terms I talked about earlier. We're back to those again. We didn't talk about responses. Responses are the actions that you're going to take to fix this risk, right? Um, if it's a high risk, you definitely need a fallback in case the risk actually happens. And then you'll have, in some cases, you'll have controls in place to ensure that everything stays the way it is in some circumstances. But the most popular one that you're going to use the most is the action. And that is, what am I going to do to reduce this risk? What am I going to do to reduce this risk? And again, you want to at least have a title and a description and a due date on when that action is going to actually be done. Next slide. Reporting on the progress. It means nothing if you do all that work and there's nothing to indicate how you're improving. You need a report that says, this is how I'm improving. Management tends to need these reports so that they can make their decisions, because you need something to justify why you want the money that you want or the change in the schedule that you want. Another thing that you can do if reports are not working, I remember in one situation, reports just simply weren't working. They weren't. And we decided to do dashboards instead. The dashboards work because they looked at it and was like, oh my God, those are my risks. Yeah, those are your risks that you would look at. So you have to kind of be flexible to get the manager's attention sometime. Okay. And next slide. So my final tips and takeaways: ensure that you have a plan and a process in place, because the last thing you ever want to do is go in a meeting and not have it, because you're assuming that you'll have a friendly crowd, and sometimes the crowd is not that friendly. And if your crowd is not friendly, they'll run you right back out of that meeting and say, we don't need your little risk review. So you want to have your documents in place and be prepared before you go in that room. Never go into a risk assessment to obtain risk without first knowing the accessible elements of the scope that you're trying to accomplish in that particular group or department. Include good cross-section of stakeholders to obtain good background information on the risk and to get folks to take ownership. If you just have like one person in there or two people in there, the other people may decide, I don't have to take ownership of this. This is Joe's risk. I don't care. I didn't have input. And so you want them to have input, because then they'll take ownership and make sure that the risk is being monitored correctly. Develop relationships with your risk owners and subject matter experts, because things go a lot smoother when you do, and you can get honest feedback to put in your risk. And emotional intelligence will take you a long way. If you understand people, how people think, how people operate, you can get a lot more done in those meetings than if you don't. Like, you may see somebody with their head hanging low. That means that they either getting burnt out or they don't feel like they're being listened to. So you need to kind of zero in on that person. So having that emotional intelligence allows you to have a more productive meeting. Those are some of the things that I just wanted to share with you. And that kind of concludes my presentation. Did you have any questions, concerns that you wanted to ask?
I have a question.
Yes.
I have noticed there is in my division projects put in place that have risks linked to them
Mhm.
in our schedule. And I was trying to understand how that fits into the framework that you described.
So we have different groups that manage their risk slightly different. And I mentioned that one group that they monitor their risks weekly. They literally have the risk associated with their schedule. And when they are ready to have those risks approved, those risks have to be approved by upper level managers. It's a whole board. It's like a board of managers that reviews those particular risks. Now, in another group, that's not the case. Those risks are approved by the actual risk team. So it just depends on the nature of the risk and the group.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I
This
know
is
this is
Armando.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. If I can, thank you very much for your presentation.
Oh, you're
And
welcome.
hello.
Hello.
I'm at Y12 and we're doing capital projects specifically. And we do have a portfolio of risk and they are linked to the schedule in order to do the what is now required by the government, integrated curves, cost and schedule curves, which those curves show the um, probability of different uh, ranges. And in order to have those curves, you have to be linked to the schedule in that each risk impacts the schedule. For schedule, not necessarily for cost, but each risk impacts the schedule activity. And the only way to get an extension uh, to see where you would be at different probabilities is to attach those risks to the schedule. I don't know if that answers your question, but that is a common practice for uh, projects that, a project defined as beginning a scope that has a beginning and an end. It's not like a program, and it's not like a ERM risk,
Correct.
where the ERM risk is for the company, if I can say that.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for adding that.
Thanks, Armando.
Well,
So
this
I
is
have,
something you go ahead.
no, go ahead.
All right. Well, this is something you hadn't really talked about, but to go with what Armando was talking about, we end up coming with we evaluate all these risks, probability, and the cost, the consequence. We come up with a pile of money that supposedly covers that. Would you have time, I don't know how we can do it quickly, but to discuss work-off curves with a management reserve that you develop? Because I see managers don't want to let go. A risk comes and goes, but the project manager doesn't want to let go of that money. Would you be able to talk about that a little bit?
Can you restate that question one more time?
Okay, yeah. Well, we come up with a management reserve based upon the risk,
Yeah. Okay.
probability, and consequence. We come up with a money that, in theory, covers those risks. A risk comes, it's fully implemented and didn't cost what we expected, or I can't think of the right word. It was realized. But the manager doesn't want to let go of the management reserve. How do
Yeah.
you deal with that?
That's tough because you're correct. The manager should assist with management reserve, but there are situations where they don't, and that's where your
Can I answer that?
Yeah, go ahead. Is that Armando?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Armando.
Yeah, Larry, the calculation that you do for management reserve is for all the known unknowns, right? So it's the bottom number that you're managing. So just because one risk is realized or is handled or it disappears, it doesn't mean that you're going to give money back because the calculation is for the whole project, if you will. So you don't want to give money back until your project is done because you don't know those known unknowns. Now, the unknown unknowns, well, they should be covered in your plan or it should be covered by your client, your customer. But you have a bucket of money to cover what may happen after you do all the assessment. Again, if one risk goes away, the, you are right, in my opinion, to keep the money or that you calculated for the project because you still don't know the known unknowns.
And if that's who I think that is that Armando that used to work at SRS?
Exactly.
Hi, Armando.
Exactly. How you doing?
I am good. I am good.
It's a
So
small world, isn't it?
Armando is fantastic when it comes to project risk. And project risk is a little bit different from what I've been explaining because I'm giving a general overview, but he really knows the importance of those Monte Carlo analysis and things of that nature to help keep you within your keep your project functioning in a healthy way. So thank you for your input, Armando.
You're welcome. And hello.
Yes.
Do we
So-
have any other questions?
So this is all sort of new to me. Most of my time spent is on program side versus project side. And this is one of the goals that I kind of set out for myself at the start of the years is to learn more about risk assessment and analyzing those things. And when you spoke about the risk registry, from a program side, is there a criteria or a threshold to say, you know, this event needs to go on the registry? And the example that I would like to give is if you had a program of $100 million and an event may happen where you see the cost could be, you know, $1,000, $5,000. That's in the grand scheme of things, that's, you know, pennies. So is there a criteria? Is there a threshold to say this is something that we need to put on
So
the
remember
radar?
when we talked about like cost and schedule? So typically with the projects that he was talking about, all their emphasis is on that cost and schedule. But with the programs, now you got to look at more stuff. So on our programs, we're looking at more than just cost and schedule, right? We're looking at mission, safety, security, reputation, customer feedback. We look at all the things that we deem that are important. I call them like the soft impacts, but when you have enough of them, they add up and they increase the risk. So that's how we look at the criteria and how we grade it.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not just those two at that point.
Okay.
Uh-huh. Any more questions?
And all this is in light of when we're doing our PMPs, when we're being scored on by NNSA, when we have a at-risk fee that we're trying to get. Is that
Yeah.
okay?
And what I've noticed is that how with NNSA,
Correct.
the risk managers that worked on those type of risks are looking at things from a system point of view.
Okay.
Those of us on the side that were doing the EM risk, we were more focused on the work breakdown structure and who's paying for what, because that's going to dictate, you know, who's going to own it and what the scope is and what have you. So we had slightly different ways of assessing because of that. And right now we're trying to consolidate those two different ways, plus project management too.
Sure. Yeah.
And again, all of them are slightly different and we're trying to consolidate and come up with one way of doing it for everybody. Yes. Hand
There
in the
are
back.
there are two comments in the chat. Nick Sandy says, thanks for a great presentation.
Oh,
And
thank
Michelle
you.
Luce says, thanks to Lisa for great information.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That it? Oh, I saw one more question. Yes.
Lisa.
Yes.
I couldn't let you away without getting another question in there. So I'm curious about, you're doing it for a little bit, right? So a lot of the questions that you the risks that you see, I hate to put you on the spot, but are they frequent flyers where you're like, hey, I've seen this movie before. This risk just keeps coming back over and over and over again. You don't know how many times you make a new register. It's like, oh, there it is. Versus something that's truly unique, or really sort of project or enterprise specific. If you had to like put that on a scale, is that really like just a 50-50, or are a lot of them really sort of common?
So those are the risks I call my summary risks. Across the site, we'll have different risks that look alike, and we call them the details, right? And then we have this catch-all called summary, and we line up all those detailed risks that go with that summary risk. So yes, we do have frequent flyers that we see a lot, and I go, oh, it's back, and then I just put it in under one of the summary risks so that management, because sometimes, you know, you have some managers that say, oh, that's not a real risk. And I'm like, dude, it keeps occurring underneath this one bucket. So yeah, I try to capture that so that they can see it and then they can make their decision. But you can't say it's not there because we've captured it.
Okay, so because you mentioned something earlier about like staffing, attrition, those sort of things, and we've had a lot, locally. But it sounds like, that's something that's happened maybe globally, where people are having, struggling to get folks, struggling to keep them, and all that.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
they have those own sort of categorization where you see that sort of? It's not just endemic to the enterprise you're dealing with, but maybe all
So
their
you're talking
peer
about
groups.
outside of here.
Yeah, so do those get captured in there as well, or do they just sort of influence how you capture your own internally?
I think you're asking me, do I see some of the same kind of risks that we see? Do I see them outside the site? Is that what you're asking me?
Well, yeah, so you have that feedback loop of if, company B over there and your company A, and you're seeing they're having that struggle, and you're like, oh, you were talking earlier about finding those common things that pop up here and pop up there. Are you looking out there for, I guess, kind of like for benchmarking to say, hey, they saw that kind of risk coming and it
What
does
did they
seem to be
do?
global. Is that something we need to capture, or, we have a blind spot, something like that?
Yes. So at the DOE level, we constantly watch what they're capturing at that level because that's an umbrella of all the installations, right? And we look and say, oh, it looks like we're all having that same problem because they have their register, right? And so we look to see what other people are dealing with as well. Or they may have something that we thought about, but we didn't want to capture it. We just said, that's not a real risk. And I'm thinking, yeah, it's a risk. But they didn't want to capture it yet. But once they see it on that large DOE register, they go, maybe we need to capture that now. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. And I try to keep up also with what's going on across the world, period. Like what is going on in industry. And if I start seeing a trend, I go, oh, we may want to pay attention to that. Like the Internet of Things. I guess because my background is IT, I just pay attention to that kind of stuff. But I said, well, I don't see this risk going away. If anything, I see this risk is going to increase and it's going to take on different forms and morph, and it has. So that's an example of just kind of looking out there, seeing what other people are saying and, what's going on in this virtual workshop, what's going on in this podcast, and just keeping my ear to the ground so I know what's going to come down the line. So when it impacts us, I'm not shocked. And I tried to bring it to somebody's attention ahead of time. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's about it. We really appreciate you coming to speak to us, Lisa. We had some
Thank you.
people that had to
Drop off?
leave, but
Yeah.
many of them were, as they were leaving, were thanking you for your great presentation. Armando definitely said, great presentation, Lisa.
That means a lot because he's the GOAT.
We hope to see you again
Thank
next
you.
month.
Thank you.
and very positive. And I very much enjoyed your presentation. I'm glad you were willing to come back and speak to us for a second time. We hope you'll be willing to come back a third, and so on as time goes by. If I may, I would like to just mention some upcoming speakers that we have. Next month, April 17, 2025, we have Roger Duke. He's going to come speak to us about Opportunity Knocks, focus on positive risks and elevate performance. May 8, 2025, Dexter Justice of the Tennessee Department of Transportation. He's going to speak on the West Knoxville Corridor project that addresses challenges facing their drivers locally there. But it's interstate highway, so it's a lot bigger than just local streets. And September 11, that's next season. We're going to take the summer off. We usually take off June, July, August. Carter Hopkins, the Savannah River Nuclear Solutions Chief Financial Officer, is going to speak to us on indirect rate management. So you'll have to tune in for that. That is all we have for tonight's presentation. Please come out and check out our YouTube channel, see some past presentations. This video will be posted out there. We appreciate you joining us. We are the online CSRA, AACE. We try to give you community, and thank you for participating. Y'all have a great evening.